I found out my cheating wife was attending the company. Imagine the perfect life. A loving wife, 3 beautiful children, a home filled with laughter, and 25 years of memories that felt like magic. That was Michael's life, or at least what he thought it was. From a young age, Michael had a passion for storytelling. Words were his escape, his way of making sense of a confusing world. When he met Emily, she became his muse. She was everything he dreamed of in a partner, kind, supportive, and endlessly loving. Together, they built a life that others envied. Friends often told them they were the definition of couple goals, and for 25 years, Michael believed it. Their silver anniversary was a grand celebration. The house buzzed with joy as friends and family gathered to toast their love. Their 3 children, Sarah, David, and Lily, gave heartfelt speeches about their parents' inspiring marriage. Emily sparkled in a silver dress that Michael had picked out for her. They danced under the stars that night, and Michael couldn't have been happier. The anniversary wasn't just a celebration of their past, it was a promise for the future. Michael remembers standing on the porch that night, holding Emily's hand, and looking out at the crowd. "We've built something amazing, haven't we?" he said. Emily smiled and nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "Yes, we have. But sometimes, life has a cruel way of hiding cracks beneath the surface." Michael recalls the little details now, things that didn't seem important back then. Emily had always been a little guarded about her phone, but wasn't everyone? He remembers the time he jokingly said, "What secrets are you hiding?" When she quickly flipped her phone screen down on the table, she laughed it off and said, "Just planning your birthday surprise at the time." He didn't think much of it. As Michael recounts that night now, he can't help but think about all the small things he ignored, the quick glances Emily shared with someone across the room, the text she answered a little too quickly, and the nights she seemed distant. At the time he chalked it up to stress or coincidence. After 25 years you stop overanalyzing things, he'd tell himself. Emily had a way of making everyone feel special. Whether it was hosting family dinners or helping the kids with school projects, she seemed to have an endless reservoir of energy. Michael often marveled at how she managed it all. "Emily could juggle 1,000 things at once, and still have time to ask me about my day," he said. "I thought that was love. I thought that was enough." Their children adored Emily, each in their own way. Sarah loved to bake with her mom, spending hours in the kitchen perfecting recipes. David, though more distant as he grew older, always shared a special bond with her. She was the one who convinced him to keep playing soccer when he wanted to quit. And Lily, the youngest, saw her mother as her best friend. Michael felt lucky to witness it all. But hindsight is a strange thing. The signs were subtle: a last-minute work dinner here, a mysterious weekend conference there. Michael had always trusted Emily. Trust was the foundation of their marriage. "She had never given me a reason to doubt her," he reflects. Or maybe I was just too blind to see it. On their anniversary night, John, their neighbor, was one of the first to arrive. He and his wife had lived next door for years, and their families had grown close. John always had a warm smile and a kind word for everyone. That night he raised a glass during the toast and said, "To Michael and Emily, the couple who gives us all hope that love really can last forever." Michael remembers feeling a swell of pride. He had no idea those words would haunt him. "I replay that toast in my head so often now," Michael admits. "How could I not see what was happening right under my nose?" The day after the party, life resumed its rhythm. Michael dove back into his writing, determined to finish his manuscript. Emily left early for work, cheerful as ever. But something felt different. Michael couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Sometimes we feel things we can't explain," Michael says. "It's like your gut knows something your mind isn't ready to accept." Emily had always been fiercely independent. She loved her job, her friends, and her hobbies. Michael admired that about her. But now, those same qualities felt distant, like walls he couldn't climb. He told himself it was just his imagination, that he was overthinking things. After all, they had just celebrated 25 incredible years together. What could possibly be wrong? Life after the anniversary returned to its roots, routine, or so it seemed. For Michael, it was business as usual: mornings spent writing in his quiet home office, afternoons with Emily when she wasn't working, and evenings filled with laughter at the dinner table. On the surface, nothing had changed, but beneath that calm exterior, Michael began to notice little things, small, almost imperceptible details that didn't sit right. It started with Greg. Greg was a young police officer in their neighborhood, a friendly guy, always eager to share a quick chat with Michael during his morning coffee run. One sunny morning, while casually sipping his coffee, Greg mentioned something that caught Michael completely off guard. "You know, Emily is a tough one," Greg said with a laugh. "She talked her way out of that speeding ticket I gave her last Tuesday." Michael froze for a moment. "Speeding ticket?" he asked, his tone light but his mind racing. "That's funny, where was this?" "Oh, just a little past Elm Street." "No big deal," Greg replied. "She was in a hurry. Said she had a meeting or something." Elm Street. Michael knew that area well. It was on the opposite side of town from Emily's office. The words didn't add up, but he forced a smile and nodded. "Classic Emily," he said, brushing it off. But inside, the first seeds of doubt had been planted. Michael replayed Greg's words in his head all day. Emily had told him she was at work that afternoon. Could she have been running an errand? Visiting a friend? His logical mind tried to dismiss it, but something felt off. He decided not to confront Emily right away. After all, it was probably nothing. But then it happened again. A few days later, while clearing the dining table after dinner, Michael noticed Emily's phone lighting up with a notification. It was just a message, something harmless, he thought. But when she quickly grabbed the phone and turned it face down, his chest tightened. Michael laughed nervously. "Who's texting you so late?" he asked. Emily smiled, but there was something forced about it. "Just work," she replied casually. "Nothing important."
Work?
At 10:30 p.m.? Michael didn't say anything, but the doubt grew louder. Over the next few days, Michael couldn't help but notice a shift. Emily had always been good at balancing her busy schedule, but now, she seemed to be out of the house more than usual. "Another work dinner," she'd explain. "Or I have to run some errands for a friend." These were the kinds of excuses he wouldn't have questioned before. But now, every explanation felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. One evening, after another late night at work, Emily returned home carrying a bag from a boutique Michael didn't recognize. "What's this?" he asked playfully, trying to mask the unease in his voice. "Oh, just a little something for myself," Emily replied, her tone breezy. She set the bag down and kissed him on the cheek, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Emily had never been one to indulge in expensive clothes or accessories without mentioning. Was this a small indulgence, or was there more to the story? Michael's growing suspicions began to seep into their daily life. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt strained. He noticed the way Emily avoided eye contact when she talked about her day. The stories she shared seemed vague and rushed, like she was trying to get through them as quickly as possible. One night at dinner, Michael couldn't hold back. "You've been so busy lately," he said casually, though his voice betrayed his tension. "Work's keeping you on your toes, huh?" Emily glanced at him briefly before focusing on her plate. "Yeah, it's been crazy," she replied. "You know how it is." Michael nodded, but his heart wasn't in it. He hated feeling this way, like a stranger in his own marriage. But every time he thought about confronting Emily directly, he stopped himself. What if he was wrong? What if it really was just work stress? That night, Michael lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He tried to remind himself that he was being paranoid. Emily had been his partner for 25 years. She loved him, didn't she? There was no reason to doubt her. But as he stared at the soft glow of the streetlights filtering through their curtains, the questions wouldn't stop. Why was she so secretive about her phone? Why did Greg's comment bother him so much? And why, suddenly, did he feel like a stranger in his own marriage? For the first time, Michael felt compelled to dig deeper. He started small. The next morning, while Emily was in the shower, he glanced at her phone lying on the bedside table. It was locked, of course, and he didn't know the passcode. His hands trembled as he set it back down. "What am I doing?" he thought to himself. "This isn't me." But the doubt didn't go away. It only grew stronger. A week later, Michael finally gave in to his suspicion. Emily had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs. It wasn't locked, and the screen displayed her email inbox. Michael hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was he really going to invade her privacy? Was he ready to confront whatever truth he might find? He took a deep breath and began to scroll. At first, there was nothing unusual: work emails, reminders, newsletters. But then, buried in the middle of her inbox, he saw a message from John, their neighbor. The subject line read, "Last night was amazing." Michael's heart sank. His hands felt cold. He clicked on the email and read the words that would shatter his world. When Emily came downstairs later, Michael was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Did she know he had seen the email? Should he confront her now or wait? And most importantly, how could this be happening? Emily gave him a puzzled look. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light. Michael forced a nod. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Just tired." But inside, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Michael couldn't sleep. The words in that email played in his head on repeat. Last night was amazing. He kept picturing Emily and John together. But no matter how hard he tried to make sense of it, he couldn't. Was it all a misunderstanding? Could it mean something innocent? Deep down, he knew the answer, but he wasn't ready to face it. The next morning, Michael acted as if everything was normal. He poured Emily her coffee, asked about her plans for the day, and even kissed her goodbye before she left for work. But as soon as the door closed behind her, his mask dropped. His hands shook as he picked up her laptop, still sitting on the kitchen counter. He opened her email again, desperately searching for more clues. Michael didn't have to look far. There were more emails, all from John, hidden in a folder she had labeled personal. The messages were explicit, filled with inside jokes, affectionate nicknames, and details about the times they'd met. His chest tightened as he read one after another, each one confirming what he had been dreading. "You looked so beautiful last night. I can't stop thinking about you. The way you laughed when I told that joke. It's been years since I've felt like this." Michael slammed the laptop shut. He felt sick to his stomach. This wasn't just a fling, it was an affair. And it wasn't new. From the dates on the emails, it had been going on for months. All those nights Emily had come home late. All those work dinners she'd mentioned, they had all been lies. Michael's mind raced with questions. Why would she do this? Hadn't they been happy? Was it something he did or didn't do? The memories of their 25th anniversary flashed through his mind: the laughter, the toasts, the way Emily had looked at him that night. Was she pretending the whole time? He felt like a fool. His anger boiled over. He grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over Emily's contact. He wanted to confront her right then and there, but something stopped him. What if he wasn't ready to hear her side? What if her excuses made it worse? He dropped the phone and paced the living room instead. The silence in the house felt deafening. Every corner of their home, the photos on the walls, the furniture they had picked out together now felt tainted. How could everything feel so perfect on the surface while it was falling apart underneath? Michael's anger began to mix with hesitation. Was this all his fault? Had he neglected Emily in some way? He remembered the nights he'd stayed up late working on his manuscript while she went to bed alone. Had she felt invisible? Unimportant? The thought stung, but it didn't justify what she had done. He knew that. Still, the questions gnawed at it. Should he confront her or let her explain on her own? He decided to wait until she came home. He needed to see her face when she talked about it. He needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. By the time Emily came home that evening, Michael had made up his mind. He couldn't keep this inside any longer. She walked through the door, smiling as she set her purse down. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, her voice light. Michael didn't answer. Instead, he handed her the laptop, which was already open to John's email. Emily's face fell. For a moment she said nothing, her eyes darting from the screen to Michael. Then, she tried to laugh it off. This isn't what it looks like." Michael's voice was calm, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. "Then tell me, Emily, what is it?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she sat down at the table, burying her face in her hands. Michael stared at her, waiting for an explanation. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Michael's calm facade cracked. "You didn't mean for this to happen? Emily, we've been married for 25 years. How do you not mean to have an affair?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, Michael. I don't know how to explain it." "Try," he snapped. "Because right now I feel like I don't even know who you are." Emily began to talk, her words tumbling out in a flood of emotion. She told him about how she had felt lonely, how their lives had become more about routine than connection. "John made me feel seen," she said, her voice breaking. "I know it was wrong, but I didn't know how to stop." Michael shook his head. "You didn't know how to stop? Emily, you could have talked to me. You could have told me how you were feeling. Instead, you chose to betray me." The argument continued late into the night. Michael's anger clashed with Emily's guilt, each of them trying to make sense of what had happened. Emily tried to apologize, but every word felt hollow to Michael. "Sorry doesn't fix this," he told her. "Sorry don't undo the lies." Eventually, the shouting gave way to silence. Emily went upstairs to sleep, but Michael stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The house felt different, colder, emptier. Every sound, every shadow seemed to remind him of what he had lost. For the first time in 25 years, Michael didn't know what the future held. The life they had built together, the home, the family, the memories now felt like a fragile illusion. He wondered if their marriage could survive this, or if it was already too late. Michael's world had already crumbled, but the aftermath of Emily's betrayal would cut even deeper. Their argument that night was just the beginning. The next morning, Michael woke up on the couch, his back sore and his mind clouded. The air in the house was heavy with tension. Emily hadn't come downstairs yet, and Michael wasn't sure he could face her again. He picked up his phone and opened a group chat with their 3 children, Sarah, David, and Lily. The family chat had always been a place for sharing light-hearted updates, photos, jokes, plans for family dinners. But today, Michael stared at the screen, unsure of what to type. How do you tell your kids that everything they've known is about to change? Finally, Michael typed a message: "Can we talk? Family meeting tonight at 7. He hit send before he could change his mind. Within minutes, Sarah responded with her usual enthusiasm. "Of course, Dad. What's up?" David and Lily followed with quick confirmation. Michael exhaled, but it didn't ease the weight in his chest. He wasn't sure how he'd get through this conversation without breaking down. That evening, the kids gathered in the living room. Sarah had brought snacks, as she always did for family meetings. David leaned back in the armchair, scrolling on his phone, while Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, her bright smile warming the room. For a moment, Michael felt a pang of guilt. They looked so carefree. He was about to shatter that. Emily came downstairs quietly, her face pale. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. Michael motioned for her to sit next to him on the couch, but the distance between them was obvious. Michael cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly. "I asked you all to come because there's something we need to talk about." The room fell silent. Sarah set down the bowl of chips, her brow furrowing. David looked up from his phone, and Lily tilted her head, her curiosity quickly turning into concern. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle but cautious. Michael hesitated, glancing at Emily. She stared at her hands, avoiding everyone's gaze. Finally, Michael spoke. "Your mother and I, we're going through something difficult. There's been a betrayal in our marriage." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The children exchanged confused looks. Lily was the first to speak. "What do you mean, betrayal?" Michael took a deep breath. "Emily, your mother has been unfaithful." Lily's eyes widened, tears immediately welling up. Sarah's jaw dropped as she turned to Emily. "Mom," she whispered, disbelief dripping from her voice. David, always the more reserved of the 3, crossed his arms and leaned back. "Is this true?" he asked Emily, his tone sharp and direct. Emily finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." "A mistake?" Sarah's voice cracked as anger replaced her shock. "That's what you call it." Lily, meanwhile, had started crying. "How could you do this?" she sobbed. "We trusted you. Dad trusted you." David stood up, his expression cold. "I don't even know what to say. This is unbelievable." The room erupted into chaos. Sarah's anger boiled over as she yelled at Emily, demanding answers. Lily cried uncontrollably, trying to process the betrayal. David, ever the stoic one, paced the room in silence, his fists clenched. Michael sat there, overwhelmed by the scene. He had hoped this conversation would bring clarity, maybe even some healing. Instead, it was tearing their family apart. Emily tried to explain, her words tumbling out in fragments. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was lonely. I made a mistake, but every word seemed to make things worse. Sarah wasn't having it. Lonely? You had us. You had Dad. How is that not enough? Michael finally stood up, raising his hands to quiet the room. Enough, he said firmly. His voice carried a weight that silenced the chaos. We're not going to solve anything like this. He turned to the kids. I know this is hard. Believe me, I know. But this isn't about choosing sides. This is about understanding what's happened and figuring out where we go from here. Despite Michael's plea for calm, the family was already splintering. Sarah and David couldn't forgive Emily. They directed their anger at her, refusing to acknowledge the pain Michael was going through. Sarah, especially, seemed to lash out at both parents. You should have told us sooner, she said to Michael. We deserve to know. Lily, however, stayed by Michael's side. She was devastated, but she seemed to sense the depth of her father's pain. Dad, she said softly, I'm here for you. Her words gave Michael a flicker of hope, but the cracks in their family were growing deeper. By the end of the night, Sarah and David left without saying much to either parent. Lily stayed behind, sitting quietly with Michael as Emily retreated upstairs. Michael stared at the empty living room, the silence almost unbearable. He had always prided himself on the strong bond their family shared. Birthdays, holidays, simple movie nights, they had always been together, always happy. But now it felt like those memories belonged to someone else's life. Lily broke the silence. Dad, she said, her voice trembling, are we going to be okay? Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. I don't know, he admitted, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we are. The days following the family meeting were a blur for Michael. Each morning, he woke up to the heavy silence of his home, a silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Emily kept to herself, mostly staying upstairs or going out for errands she never explained. The kids were distant, each processing the revelation in their own way. For Michael, the once familiar warmth of their family life felt like a distant memory. Sarah's response to the situation was loud and unfiltered. She didn't hold back her frustration, particularly with Michael. The morning after the family meeting, she called him, her voice shaking with anger. Dad, I don't understand how you let this happen, she began. How did you not see it? How could you just not know? Michael, already drained, sighed into the phone. Sarah, it's not that simple. I trusted her, but that's exactly the problem, she snapped. You trusted her, and now look where it's gotten us. Our family is falling apart, and it feels like you just let it happen. Sarah, Michael said softly. This isn't about blaming anyone. It's about figuring out how we move forward from here. Her voice cracked as she replied, move forward? How? Dad, she destroyed everything. How do you expect us to act like it can all just go back to normal? I don't, Michael admitted, but I do expect us to find a way to heal, even if it takes time. There was a pause on the other end before Sarah muttered, I don't know if I can do that. Then the line went dead, leaving Michael to stare at his phone, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. David, on the other hand, handled his emotions in the opposite way. He didn't yell or argue. Instead, he withdrew completely. Michael tried texting him several times, and each message went unanswered. When he called, David's responses were short and cold. One afternoon, determined to bridge the gap, Michael drove to David's apartment. David opened the door but didn't invite him in. They stood awkwardly in the hallway, Michael searching for the right words. I just wanted to check on you, Michael began. You haven't been answering my calls. David shrugged. I've been busy? Michael frowned. David, I know this is hard, but we need to stick together. I need you to talk to me. David crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. What's there to talk about? Mom cheated and now everything's messed up. What else is there to say? More than you think, Michael replied gently. But if you're not ready, I'll wait. David nodded stiffly, and Michael left, his heart sinking as he realized just how far his son had pulled away. Lily, the youngest, was the only one who stayed close to Michael. She made it her mission to visit him often, bringing homemade cookies or little drawings to cheer him up. One evening, as they sat in the kitchen sipping tea, Lily finally voiced the question that had been on her mind. Dad, she asked hesitantly, do you think you'll ever forgive Mom? Michael stared into his cup, the steam curling upward like unspoken words. I don't know, he admitted. I want to for you, for Sarah and David. But every time I see her, all I can think about are the lies. Lily's eyes welled with tears. I'm scared, she said softly. I don't want our family to fall apart. Michael reached across the table and took her hand. We'll figure this out, he promised. It won't be easy, but we will. Meanwhile, Emily struggled to cope with the fallout of her action. She reached out to the kids, sending long messages and leaving voicemails, but most of her efforts went unanswered. Sarah didn't reply at all. David sent a curt, I'm not ready to talk. Only Lily offered occasional, short responses. One night, Michael overheard Emily on the phone with her sister. Her voice was thick with tears. I've ruined everything, she sobbed. I don't know how to fix this. Michael barely looks at me. And the kids, they hate me. Michael lingered in the doorway, torn between pity and anger. A part of him wanted to comfort her, to assure her that things would get better. But another part, a much louder part, reminded him of the betrayal. In the end, he said nothing and went to bed alone, leaving her cries to echo in the empty house. The routines that once brought their family together now felt foreign. Dinner was a quiet, strained affair, with Michael and Emily sitting at opposite ends of the table. The kids stopped coming over entirely, and the house seemed to grow emptier with each passing day. Michael tried to distract himself with his writing, but even that felt hollow. Words that once flowed easily now felt stuck, buried beneath layers of anger and sadness. He sat at his desk for hours, staring at the blank screen, his mind replaying the events of the past few weeks. One evening Sarah showed up at the house unannounced. Michael was surprised but welcomed her in, his heart lifting slightly at the sight of her. "I've been thinking," she said hesitantly, standing in the doorway. "About what you said. About moving forward." Michael nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I'm still angry," she admitted. "At Mom, at you, at everything. But I don't want this to destroy us." Her words were like a balm to Michael's soul. "Neither do I," he said. "But it's going to take time." Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I just miss the way things used to be." "So do I," Michael replied. "But maybe we can find something new, something better." In the weeks that followed, there were small but significant signs of healing. Sarah started visiting more often, sometimes bringing David along. The conversations were awkward at first, but they began to thaw. Lily remained a constant source of support, her presence a reminder that not all was lost. Even Emily began to show glimmers of change. She apologized again, this time with no excuses or justification. She started therapy, determined to understand and address the choices that had led to the affair. It was a slow, painful process, but it was a step in the right direction. Michael still wasn't sure if he could ever truly forgive her, but for the first time he felt the faintest flicker of hope. Perhaps they could build something new, not the life they had before, but something that could still hold meaning. The weeks following the fallout tested Michael's resilience in ways he had never imagined. Every day felt like a tightrope walk, balancing between anger, grief, and a faint glimmer of hope. His home, once a sanctuary of laughter and warmth, now echoed with silence. Every relationship in his life had been strained, and rebuilding them seemed like a daunting, endless task. Still, Michael clung to the idea that, with time, they could heal. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. Michael stood in the kitchen, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, when his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen and froze. The name David lit up, and his heart raced. He fumbled to answer. "David," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, though his pulse betrayed his calm tone. "It's good to hear from you." There was a pause on the other end before David spoke. "Hey Dad, I've been thinking about things, about everything." Michael leaned against the counter, gripping its edge. "I've been thinking too," he said gently, "and I miss you." Another long pause. Finally David's voice came back, quieter this time. "I miss you too. Can we talk? In person?" Michael exhaled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "Of course, anytime. Just tell me when." They arranged to meet later that week, and Michael spent the following days oscillating between nervous anticipation and cautious optimism. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. Michael arrived early at the cafe David had chosen, settling into a table near the window. He ordered 2 coffees, hoping the gesture would make the meeting less awkward. When David walked in, Michael stood to greet him, but David hesitated before offering a brief handshake. They sat across from each other, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. David stared at his coffee, stirring it without drinking. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted. Michael leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Then we don't have to solve everything today. Let's just talk." David nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. I've been so angry. At Mom, at you, at the whole situation. I felt like I couldn't trust anyone." Michael swallowed hard. "I know, and I understand why. But I want to change that. I want to earn your trust back." David looked up for the first time, his expression conflicted. "I don't know if it's that easy." "It's not," Michael admitted. "But I'm willing to do the work if you are." David's lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Emily was navigating her own path to redemption. Therapy sessions became her lifeline as she worked to understand the choices that had led her to the affair. It was a painful process, filled with revelations that left her emotionally raw, but she was determined to make amends. One evening she approached Michael cautiously. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Michael closed the book he'd been pretending to read. "About what?" Emily hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "About us. About what happens next." Michael sighed, motioning for her to sit. "Okay, I'm listening." She sat down across from him, her eyes red from crying. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've hurt everyone, and I know there's no excuse for what I did. But I want to fix this, if you'll let me." Michael studied her for a long moment. "Fixing this isn't just about saying you're sorry, Emily. It's about showing it. And it's going to take time. A lot of time." "I understand," she said quietly, "and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Michael nodded, his heart still heavy with doubt. He wanted to believe her sincerity, but trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. A few days later, Sarah arrived at Michael's house unexpectedly. Her visits had become more frequent, though she continued to keep her interactions with Emily to a minimum. This time she brought her children with her, catching Michael off guard. "Grandpa," Sarah's youngest son Ethan exclaimed as he ran into the living room. Michael's face lit up as he scooped Ethan into his arms. "Hey buddy, what a surprise." Sarah stood in the doorway, her expression soft but guarded. "I thought it was time they saw you. They've missed you." Michael hugged Ethan tightly, his eyes glistening. "I've missed them too. And you." The visit was short, but it left Michael feeling a renewed sense of hope. For the first time in weeks he felt like the pieces of his life might eventually fit together again. The idea of a family dinner had been Lily's, a suggestion she made cautiously one evening as she sat with Michael in the kitchen. "It doesn't have to be perfect," she said. "Just a start." Michael agreed, though he braced himself for the potential fallout. The dinner was awkward at first. Sarah and David avoided direct eye contact with Emily, who remained mostly silent. But as the night went on, the atmosphere began to thaw. By the time dessert was served, Sarah was recounting a funny story from work, and even David cracked a smile. Michael watched his children and grandchildren with a mixture of gratitude and longing. It wasn't the family they had been, but it was something, and for now, that was enough. Months later, Michael found himself sitting in his study, reflecting on the journey they had all been through. The pain of Emily's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined his every waking moment. The family was healing, slowly but surely, and that was enough to keep him going. Emily walked in, holding 2 cups of tea. She set one down on his desk and hesitated. "I thought you could use this." Michael looked up, meeting her gaze. For the first time in a long time, he saw something in her eyes that gave him hope, sincerity. "Thanks," he said quietly. As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Emily." She stopped, glancing back. "Yes." Michael hesitated before speaking. "I'm willing to try to forgive, but it's going to take time." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "I'll wait as long as it takes." Michael managed a faint smile. It wasn't the end of their story, but it was the beginning of a new chapter. The road to healing wasn't linear. It wasn't a straight path with clear markers or a destination. For Michael, it was a maze full of twists, wrong turns, and dead ends. Each day brought new challenges and revelation, but also moments of unexpected connection and growth. As the weeks turned into months, the pain of Emily's betrayal began to settle into something different, a quiet ache, rather than a sharp wound. Emily's journey toward redemption was slow and painful. Therapy had become her anchor, a place where she confronted not only her choices but the emotions she had buried for years. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, she approached Michael. "Can we talk?" she asked, standing in the doorway of his study. Michael looked up from his laptop, his expression cautious. "About what?" Emily stepped inside, her hands clasped nervously. "About us, about what I'm learning." He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." Emily sat across from him, her eyes red from crying. "My therapist said something today that really hit me. She said I've been running from my own guilt, from my own insecurities, and I used the affair as a way to escape. But it wasn't about you, Michael. It was about me." Michael's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "And what does that mean for us?" "It means I'm working on it." "On me," she said. "I can't ask for forgiveness yet, but I want you to know I'm trying." Michael studied her for a moment before replying. "Trying is a start. But it's not enough." "Not yet." "I understand," Emily said softly. "And I'll keep trying." David remained distant. Though Michael had started to notice subtle shifts, he would answer texts more often, even if his replies were short. Then, one Saturday morning, Michael received a surprising message. "Are you free for coffee today?" Michael responded immediately. "Yes." Name the place and time. They met at a small cafe on the edge of town. David arrived looking apprehensive but determined. As they sat down, Michael smiled. "It's good to see you." David nodded, avoiding his father's gaze. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything." Michael waited patiently, giving David the space to speak. "I was angry," David admitted. "I still am, to be honest. But I realized something. Shutting you out doesn't make it better. It just makes me feel worse." Michael's chest tightened. "I've missed you, David. I've been waiting for you to be ready." David finally looked up. "I don't know if I'll ever be completely ready, but I want to try." Michael smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all I need to hear." Lily had always been the glue holding them together, and she took on that role with even more determination. She arranged a casual picnic in the park, inviting Sarah and David without telling them Emily would be there. "Just trust me," she told Michael when he questioned her. On the day of the picnic, tensions were high. Sarah greeted Michael warmly but stiffened when she saw Emily. David stayed on the outskirts, clearly uncomfortable, but Lily had anticipated that. She distracted her siblings with games and food, slowly breaking down their defenses. By the time the sun began to set, the atmosphere had shifted. Sarah and David weren't exactly warm toward Emily, but they were civil. They even laughed when Ethan, Sarah's youngest, spilled juice all over himself and declared he was melting. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a start. That evening, Michael sat alone on the porch, watching the stars. The day had been exhausting but rewarding. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of possibility. The fractures in their family were still visible, but they were beginning to mend. Emily joined him, sitting quietly beside him. "Today was nice," she said after a long silence. "It was," Michael agreed. "I think we're getting somewhere." Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'm willing to wait as long as it takes, Michael. For you, for them." He turned to her, searching her face for any sign of insincerity. There was none. "It's going to take time," he said. "A lot of time." "I know," she replied. "But I'm not going anywhere." Months later, Michael found himself sitting in the audience of a small bookstore. He had been invited to speak about his latest book, a deeply personal memoir about betrayal, resilience, and healing. As he stepped up to the microphone, he spotted his family in the crowd: Sarah, David, Lily, and even Emily. He began his speech with a deep breath. "This book is about pain," he said, "but it's also about hope. It's about the things that break us and the things that put us back together." After the event, his family gathered around him. Sarah hugged him tightly. "That was beautiful, Dad," she said. David nodded, a rare smile gracing his face. I'm proud of you. Even Emily approached him cautiously. Thank you for sharing our story, she said. It couldn't have been easy. Michael looked at her, his heart full but heavy. It wasn't, he admitted, but it was necessary. As they left the bookstore together, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was enough. Healing didn't come with a roadmap. For Michael, every step forward felt precarious, as though the ground beneath him could give way at any moment. Still, progress, no matter how small, was progress. His family, once fractured, was beginning to stitch itself back together, though the scars would remain. The journey wasn't over, but they were learning to live with the pain, and more importantly, with each other. It was Lily's idea to organize a family weekend getaway. She presented it as a way to create new memories, to start fresh. We need this, she told Michael one evening. All of us. Even Mom. Michael hesitated. The idea of spending an entire weekend together, especially with the lingering tension, felt overwhelming. But Lily's determination won him over. All right, he said with a sigh. Let's try it. The retreat was set at a lakeside cabin, surrounded by towering pine trees and the gentle lap of water against the shore. When they arrived, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Sarah and David kept their distance from Emily, while Lily worked tirelessly to keep the peace. The first day was filled with awkward silences and forced smiles. They ate lunch outside on the deck, the sound of the lake filling the pauses in conversation. Michael tried to engage Sarah and David in light conversation, but their responses were clipped. By dinner, the tension was palpable. As they passed dishes around the table, Sarah finally broke the silence. Why did you do it, Mom? She asked, her voice steady but sharp. Everyone froze. Emily looked down at her plate, her hands trembling. I don't know how to explain it, she said, but I never meant to hurt any of you. That's not good enough, Sarah snapped. You destroyed our family. Don't we deserve an explanation? Michael stepped in, his voice calm but firm. Sarah, this isn't the time or place. No, Dad, Sarah said, her eyes filled with tears. It's exactly the time. We can't keep pretending everything's fine. Emily took a deep breath. You're right, she said quietly. I owe you all the truth. The room was silent as Emily began to speak. She talked about the loneliness she had felt, the disconnect she hadn't known how to bridge. I made a terrible mistake, she said, her voice breaking. I let my insecurities and my selfishness take over, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. Sarah wiped her eyes, her anger softening into something more vulnerable. Do you even love Dad? She asked. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. I do. I always have. And I'm trying every day to prove that love, even if it's too late. David, who had been silent, finally spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom, not yet. But I don't want to lose our family. His words hung in the air, a fragile olive branch. Michael placed a hand on his son's shoulder. None of us want that, he said. And we don't have to decide everything tonight. But this is a start. The next morning, the family went for a hike around the lake. The tension from the previous night lingered, but there was also a sense of release. They walked in pairs, sometimes talking, sometimes lost in thought. Michael and Sarah fell into step together, their conversation light at first. I'm sorry for snapping last night, Sarah said eventually. I've been holding so much in. I know, Michael said. And you have every right to be angry, but holding on to it forever won't help. Sarah nodded. I'm trying, Dad. I really am. Nearby, Emily walked with Lily, their heads closed as they spoke in hushed tones. David trailed behind, watching his siblings interact with a mix of caution and hope. By the end of the hike, the family gathered by the water's edge, their silhouettes framed by the setting sun. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it felt significant, like the beginning of something new. Back home, Michael began to find solace in his writing again. The words came slowly at first, but they came. His manuscript, which had felt like a burden for so long, began to take shape as a story of resilience and redemption. One evening, as he sat at his desk, he called Lily into the room. I want you to read something, he said, handing her a few printed pages. Lily read in silence, her expression shifting from curiosity to emotion. When she finished, she looked up at Michael, her eyes glistening. This is beautiful, Dad, she said. It's raw and honest, and hopeful. Michael smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. That's what I'm aiming for. Months later, the family gathered at Michael's home for a barbecue. It was the first time in years that they all felt comfortable enough to share a meal without tension dominating the room. The kids played in the yard, their laughter filling the air, while the adults sat around the table, reminiscing and sharing stories. Sarah raised her glass during dessert. To new beginnings, she said, her eyes meeting Emily's briefly before glancing at Michael. And to Dad, for holding us together. Michael felt a lump in his throat as he raised his glass. To all of us, for finding our way back. Healing didn't mean the end of pain. It meant learning to carry it differently. For Michael and his family, the scars of Emily's betrayal will always be there, but they no longer define them. They had found a way to move forward, not perfectly, but together. As Michael watched his family that evening, he felt a quiet sense of pride. They weren't the same people they had been before, but maybe that was a good thing. They were stronger now, more aware of each other's flaws and strengths. And in that imperfection, they had found something worth holding on to.